So I think we're going to go ahead and get started with this panel today, and we are going to be discussing scaling cannabinoid cultivation and yield. I am Christina Etter. I am the editorial content director for CannabisTech.com, and I just want to welcome everybody for being here today. I know the CBD Expo, we've been waiting for it to come back for a long time. It's great to see these in-person events again and get a chance to network and really get connected to the industry again. I think that's something that's very, very important here. You know, we are living in an absolutely incredible time. We're witnessing the rise of hemp and cannabis and the end of prohibition in the United States. From a business perspective, however, there is a lot more involved in getting established in this industry than going out and throwing a few seeds in the ground and calling yourself a hemp farmer. There's just so much more to it than that. Cultivating a high-end crop of hemp or cannabis for human consumption requires a lot more forethought involving compliance, regulation, and consumer safety. As a child of Iowa farmers, I am painfully aware of the problems of pesticides and toxins in the farming environment. And that is one of the reasons why, after losing my parents to cancer from pesticide use, it's so vital for me to have this conversation about growing good, quality, organic hemp in an environment that is conducive for the consumer. That is just something that's very, very critical and vital. But at the same time, we've got to look at this from a business perspective, and we've got to build those yields. We've got to scale these cultivation facilities, and we've got to be able to grow the industry with the demand that is behind it. Staying organic and scaling cultivation needs to be at the top of every hemp producer's priority list. The panel that we have today understands the importance of quality hemp production, from choosing the best location to finding the perfect genetics and using automation and natural enhancements to increase that cannabinoid cultivation and yield. So let me introduce who we have for you today. First, we have Joe Wicker, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Botanic Wellness, and he has a background in finance and economics. He's a business owner and entrepreneur, and he uses this experience in business development, real estate, and mortgage banking to create partnerships with large agricultural farmers and develop these vertical integrations and strategies for the hemp industry. And then with Botanic Wellness, he has a broad range of experience that he himself has gone through as he's developed his own company. So we have a very depth look at experience in the industry. Dion Carroll, who is the second person down there, or the second person from the end down here. She works for Higher Yields Consulting and is a multidisciplined engineer who works in facility design. And she actually went out and pursued her engineering degree specifically to support the cannabis industry and the hemp industry. So how incredible is that? She has been involved in working at a facility, one of the largest in Colorado, that helps support 20 dispensaries in the state, and she works with some of the largest operations. Bryant Jones, who's the second gentleman here, he is a cannabis genetics and propagation scientist. As a cannabis breeder and plant scientist specializing in horticultural production, he studies at the University of Minnesota and recently received the Mahmoud El Soli Award in 2019 for his work in cannabis breeding. So we're thrilled to have him on the panel today too. And then down at the very end, we have Tim Gordon, who is the scientific officer at Impello Biosciences. And he has more than 20 years of experience in eco-sustainable cannabis farming. As a developer of industry-leading cannabis agricultural operations, Tim is absolutely no stranger to increasing yields. As a board member of the U.S. Hemp Growers Association and the Hemp Industries Association, he brings a breadth of knowledge to this panel today. Tim has been interviewed, quoted, and featured in U.S. and international news programs, magazines, and periodicals. Welcome to the panel, everyone. We are so excited to have you here and have this conversation. And I want to get started really just kind of talking about this from a ground up kind of perspective, because that's really what cultivation is about. You start at the ground and you work your way up. So, Joe, do you want to kind of kick off this discussion and talk to us from your experience with the Botanic Wellness? You know, finding that perfect property, finding everything that you need in order to go into this business has got to be challenging, from regulations and restrictions to just finding the right region. Talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that farmers today face when they're looking at these properties and really wanting to look at a place that they can grow into and scale.
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of ways to get started into farming, and I'm speaking specifically about outdoor cultivation on larger scale. It's tempting to just want to go and find an inexpensive piece of land that hasn't been farmed before and try and convert that into a farm, and that has a lot of pitfalls to it and a lot of complications that you would need to go through in order to make sure that's going to be successful for you. And there's an old term in real estate that all real estate is local, and that couldn't be more true with farming, frankly. Every area of the country has its unique challenges, from weather, water, soil that would need to be looked into, and all the due diligence would need to be done before you could even take a patch of land and turn it into a farm. So that's one option to do. It's capital intensive. It's a very intensive process to convert a regular piece of land into a farm, and it would probably be one of the bigger ways to take on the project, more complicated ways. Another way would just be to purchase an existing farm that you can do soil testing on. You already have water rights to, might speed that process along. Another option to getting into farming that's very popular, it takes less capital, is to go ahead and lease land that's already farmed. Which can be a lot more efficient as far as from a business perspective. And then you can also just do contract farming. You can go to where there is an operating farm, let them know exactly what you want to grow, use the experience of the farmer, and the experience they have on their own land is immeasurable. Somebody who's been farming their land for 10, 20 years, they have a depth of experience of what will work and will not work inside on that soil that is irreplaceable. So you can do contract farming, and then there's we at my company, we have a model where we actually do farming partnerships, which is a little different, where we actually do some sharing in profits with the farmers themselves, to have them be motivated to go ahead and really share, not just do a contract farm where they do what we're told, but they're given the freedom to go ahead and contribute to the process with their knowledge and their experience. So that's one way to start. And then if you're when you are getting started, the other complication as far as capital goes is you need to know what kind of equipment that you're going to use to go ahead and put the seeds in the ground all the way through to harvest. And that's not as simple as just laying out your plan and doing it, because really you need to be so forward thinking that you know where your end crop is going and how it's being used before you can set up a harvest plan. There's several ways to harvest hemp, and there are three different, at least we farm for three different uses for hemp. We farm for grain, we farm for fiber, and we farm for CBD or the medicine. Those will bring you into different farming techniques just in the side of what you're doing to grow, and then on top of that, the extraction for the medicine, how you're going to deliver that to the extractor and how they want to see it will cause you to formulate your plan for harvesting as well. So as with a lot of farmers that started with hemp, we started with what was the dogma of the industry at the time, mimicking what would be marijuana grows. And frankly, it doesn't work from an economic standpoint to grow hemp like you would grow marijuana, because there's just not the value at the end. So we've adapted a big ag model for growing hemp, which what that means is, rather than feminizing seeds and going out and pulling out the males on a regular basis and having a very labor-intensive farming technique, using more of something you would see like in Nebraska or someplace like that where they use corn where you can actually go in, use, we have very dense plants population to help choke out weeds. Leave the males in the field so that you can actually, harvest for the grain. Also, the males are useful for the fiber, and then you can also use whenever you have a super dense plant population like that, you can use the automated equipment in order to go ahead and harvest it. And then the last piece is, for hemp that's important is drying your hemp, or not even drying your hemp. There's a couple different ways that the biomass can be processed. The most popular way and the most popular dogma that you would find maybe last year when you'd come to a farming talk like this, they'd tell you to put maybe 2,000 plants per acre. You're going to cut that down and you're going to dry it, and then you're going to buck the plant to deliver only flower to an extraction lab. And frankly, on a big ag scale, it just doesn't work. You can't really buck all that material. You can't. You can dry the material depending on your climate that you're in and make that work, but there are other options. We definitely get seeded. All of our females get seeded and pollinated because we leave the males in the field. But rather than pulling the males at the beginning, we're able to sort out remove those seeds prior to delivering that to the extractor. So it's a front end or back end kind of a problem solving that you can go through, and that's something you need to do based on what do the numbers look like. What is it going to cost you to do one versus the other, to try and get your costs down, because right now that's what the survival is delivering a good product without having to use the price scale that most of us started in this industry with, which was 1,000 times the price what it is right now. So those are a lot of the factors as far as where you want to look at where you start, and then how are you going to actually have a productive farm. Frankly, we've gone, instead of the 2,000 plants per acre, we're using 5 to 10 pounds of seed per acre, which would be, there's about 25,000 seeds. So instead of doing 2,000 seeds an acre, we're doing anywhere from 25,000 to 100,000 seeds per acre, to try and get that plant population up and make it actually economical to grow. Like I said, it has its own challenges, but it's one of those things. If you're going to be farming, you're going to have to work out, and farmers are geniuses at this anyway. Work out all of the hurdles and the obstacles that you're going to run into on a day-to-day basis, in order to make the crop profitable, in order to deliver a good crop to an extraction lab if it's for medicine, or a decorticator if it's for fiber, or being able to deliver the grain.
Fantastic. You mentioned something there that I wanted to touch base on, and you talked about the different types of hemp crops and looking at the big picture. And I think that's really what needs to be done when you're looking at getting into the hemp industry is seeing that end goal and then working from there. But you talked about the flexibility and learning and adjusting to your environment. And just how critical is it for farmers to be adaptable and to learn from their mistakes and kind of go through that learning process? We talked about on the floor a little bit ago. I think that learning process is really kind of critical in this industry because we're all learning as we're going through this.
Yeah, you definitely have to be adaptable. It fits exactly with what nature does anyway. Mother Nature has had, literally millions of years to work out all of the details and the complications to have the plant grow effectively. And then we walk in and try and duplicate that just off what we think we know as a human being. So what's going to happen is you're going to leave something out. You're going to mess something up. You're going to try something that doesn't work, and you have to be able to adapt and learn from that. Honestly, to really, if you're starting from not farming before, hemp at least, and you have experience as a farmer, it's likely going to take you 2 to 3 crops to dial in the process, in order to really get it to where you find something that's even workable, and then over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to dial that in to have maximum efficiency. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Bryant, I'd like to jump over to you. What you do is absolutely fascinating, and I would love to talk about your studies in genetics and just how very important it is for farmers to understand the variable genetics when they are planting their crops. They have to be able to understand, what that end result is. If they're working for a consumable product, that's one thing. If they're working for, fiber for hemp, that's a whole nother thing. Talk to us a little bit about how very important genetics are and what you've kind of learned in some of the studies that you're working on in terms of improving genetics and making things, improving those yields for farmers.
Yeah, sure. The biggest thing that I've found recently is kind of a hybrid of what you both were saying. You have to not put the cart before the horse, and that really starts with first figuring out your genetics, and then second of all, your end product. Those can be interchangeable, but you really have to figure out the benefit of your end product and weigh it in terms of what you plan to put in. And I've seen a lot of people who overextend themselves in the cannabis industry, particularly farmers, inexperienced farmers, and they when cannabis became legal, the whole allure of just the cannabis plant was enough for people to bet the whole house and caboodle on it. And, unfortunately, a lot of people have failed. And a lot of it's centered around them not having a clear focus on what they wanted to end with. At the university, I took that in mind and started performing certain experiments that would benefit, any type of farmer, from the experienced farmer to the beginning farmer. And those experiments centered around certain switches that turned on and off certain terpene profiles. And these things are the main attractors of cannabis. The first thing that somebody's going to be attracted to when they come in contact with the plant is going to be some organoleptic property of the plant. Now, whether that be a smell or a taste that you are, privy to, that's what's going to attract you to the plant. It's not necessarily the potency of the plant. It's not necessarily the cannabinoids. It's always the smell and the taste, the touch. And I really wanted to investigate the things that would differentiate in an indoor situation versus an outdoor situation. And certain chemovars, as I like to say, not strains, because you strain a muscle or there's strains of bacteria. There's not strains of cannabis. So the certain chemovars that you use, now you can optimize them for indoor use or outdoor use. And the only way that you would know that is if you were to investigate that. And some of these chemovars that are being used are better suited for indoors. Some that are being used in outdoors are, vice versa. So I wanted to investigate that, and also looking at the most overlooked input in cannabis is the amount of canopy management that's used. So I wanted to investigate that. That's another one of my studies that I did, and we decided to look at the techniques that were arbitrarily adopted from the traditional market into the commercial market. And we wanted to compare and contrast those and see which ones were actually viable at scale and which ones weren't. Things that we all know, like scrogging or femming or topping. These types of things are done to mutilate the plant and excite a different type of growth pattern. Right. And every grow house has their own mix of how they manage their canopies. So that study was really aimed to actually drive down the cost of cannabis to the end user, because a lot of money is put into bud tenders and people who have to manage the canopy. And if we can really streamline their efforts, then the cost of cannabis would be driven down. My latest study is being centered around controlling the cannabinoid properties of your plant in the field. So new regulations are centered around allowing the farmer to mitigate their crop in the field in case of a hot test. Most farmers, unfortunately, would just chop their stuff down or burn it, for sake of the DEA coming to crash naturally. Unfortunately, some people lost their whole home, and everything that they worked for years, unfortunately, and some farmers ended up having much more detrimental things happen to them. But the aim of this study was to, or is to, allow the farmer a very simple mitigation method to bring cannabis into compliance in the field.
Interesting.
Whether it be a bag system or a foliar system or a combination of the two, something that won't require much thought, but will guarantee you a certain percentage down, in the right way. So all these efforts, the grand overarching is it's all done in compassion for the farmer,
Right.
for the end user to take out the guess game in cultivating cannabis. And that's one reason why I like to do horticultural research in academia, the opportunity to put out extension pages. It's this free, open access information for anybody who's actually just looking. And that's one thing that we pride ourselves on at the University of Minnesota.
Fascinating. You mentioned too with the genetics and the mediation or the remediation there in the field. I'm curious, just future thinking. You walk out into this expo today and you see the various vendors, and most of them now are starting to explore minor cannabinoids and the things that are being produced in the plant. I'm very anxious for the future of genetics to see how those plants can be, genetically manipulated to produce the cannabinoids that they're looking for, similar to how they might, manipulate the plant to produce less THC.
Yeah, and even a more futuristic view of that would be euclidation of certain plant cells to produce these specific cannabinoids or terpenes. Gone could be the day of growing a whole plant just to harvest the limonene or lavender or CBN out of it, or we could just take certain plant parts, utilize those cells, and get those cells to produce use those powerhouses to our advantage. And it would still be a natural source of these products. So that's what I would like to see in the future.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. It's so interesting to see where science is taking us in this industry, and researchers like you that are kind of pushing that envelope to unveil some of these things. It's just absolutely fascinating. Mm-hmm. Dion, let's talk a little bit to you and what you have worked on, and I'm really interested to kind of hear your background. So now you spoke to me before the panel about working on some of the largest scale cannabis cultivation facilities here in Colorado. From your perspective and what you've learned, what are some of the important things that people need to consider when they're looking at their cultivation facilities to really help encourage that best environment possible? And what are some of the technologies maybe that you're looking at in the facilities that you're using to help make those cultivation processes easier?
So some great questions. Well, honestly, I really like the fact that Brian and Joe both mentioned starting with the end in mind, because when you're looking at building out these facilities or even just scaling your original operations and processes, you really need to understand where you are in comparison to where you're going. When it comes to some of the larger projects that I've worked on, a lot of times you're starting at A, they're trying to get to Z, but they're just jumping around and not necessarily understanding the resources that it necessarily takes in order to get to those points. For example, in a lot of cases, when I'm starting off certain cultivations, whether it be hemp or cannabis, honestly, I try to start with smaller, simpler solutions and making sure that we are successful in building up from there. Not all the time can we utilize our original operation and directly scale that linearly. So you can't necessarily just start adding take a modular box and start adding multiples of that same cultivation or that same system to your operation and expect that to produce the same yields or the same, I suppose, scaled yields. So when looking at automating your facility or just simply scaling your facility, that's where I really like to come in and look at what type of yields are you trying to accomplish, as well as what resources you have from the get-go. because a lot of operations, they start off with perhaps not necessarily the right capital, the right locations, the right utility resources. So when you do start to, bring on a whole, when we're talking about more acreage or perhaps other rooms when we're looking at indoor grows, you might not have the necessary power allocations in order to suffice with your new light allotment. You might not have the proper water resources in order to properly feed those additional acres. So being able to understand what you're starting with and how you need to change your operation and be flexible, be agile, that's where you can start to be a little bit more strategic, where you're understanding perhaps the revenue that you're building with the smaller operation that you have, and how to put that revenue back in order to get more so automated feed cycles and utilize the right resources and the right teams. When Brian was talking about canopy management, that is extremely important, because a lot of times I do see the overextension of our resources, where you see one person trying to perhaps water indoor grows that are over 100,000 acres, and that's just not, it's not a fiscally responsible operation, doesn't work out for workflow, and I'd imagine your plants aren't being taken care of properly. So in some cases, we really just need to be looking at the numbers, looking at the data, and making sure that that does all add up properly. However, we need to make sure that we're being flexible in real time in order to make sure that we are making those necessary changes. When we're talking about certain automation processes, automating everything isn't necessarily going to give you better yields or give you better products. Honestly, I definitely recommend being strategic when we are talking about things like that, because in some cases I do more so recommend that you want to have your growers to be a little bit more hands-on. In some cases, you want to make sure that, and it really is, again, thinking about your end product. How do you want this end product to come out, right? So do you necessarily want to just be pushing out, the most product with textile capabilities, or are you looking for perhaps something a little bit more boutique when we're looking at higher cannabinoid yields? So you don't necessarily want to just be putting everything on an automated light and automated feed spectrum without having those hands-on processes. As Joe was mentioning, sometimes it's not necessarily fiscally responsible to perhaps shuck all of your product in certain processes. So honestly, understanding that from a business perspective, as well as looking at your teams and your resources really, and how that all comes together, is extremely important. And really, as I had mentioned previously before this panel, we're taking complex problems and trying to provide simple solutions. So it's kind of just about breaking down where you're at, what you have, and those small gaps in between. And you can really do that. You can really do that at multiple levels of your process, from a larger high-level business process to a very everyday practical standpoint, where you're looking at, okay, how may we need to change these feed cycles? What's going to change throughout my operation in day-to-day resource allocation if I am bringing on additional acreage or additional lighting and things of that nature? So yeah, just honestly being utilizing critical thinking and being strategic with your resources and where you want to be is going to be extremely important in scaling your operations and your cultivations.
Thank you, Dion. And you kind of led me into a great segue there, because as we sit here and we talk to Joe, we've found the perfect property. We've found this place that's going to be, that we've tested the soils and everything is good. And then we went to Bryant and we talked about the breeding and the genetics and the different types of plants that we're going to be looking at and things that we can do there to ensure that our crop is going to produce those yields that we're looking for. Then we go to Dion, and she's going to design this incredible facility, or she's going to help us get these processes really narrowed down and simplified. And Tim, I would love to go to you last and talk about some of the more environmental conditions. And you work a lot with microbial inoculants, and how do we really ensure that the environment and the soils and everything is just perfect for those plants, and how critical is that in the cultivation process?
Great. Yeah, this is great. You guys are giving out some really solid information. And if you put all this together, you get an extenuating factor in cannabis cultivation where it leads to optimal cultivation. And you break this down into swim lanes, whether it be your facility or your grounds, and you optimize there. You look into genetics. I've done a lot of genetics work, so I'm going to talk with you afterward. You look into the genetics. You look for stability markers. You say, is this going to be optimal for my end use? You go inside what you do, Danelle, and you look inside the environment. How do you optimize the environment? Well, I take it one step further in my decades of cannabis, because I think what all these are controllable. So you take environment, you take the delta of uncontrollable and try to control it to optimize expression. So I do that underneath the ground, and I do that a little bit above the air in as far as further expression. But what I've done is I sequence the cannabis microbiome. Believe it or not, it's real. It produces its own specific bacteria, draws them in when it's into the ground, and it makes it work very, very efficiently. So I took that information over several years, and I created Impella Biosciences with a bunch of smart kids. And so we've incorporated biostimulants, is what we call it. It's kind of quantum biology, and it's really the next level of cannabis cultivation, but it's also the next level of just in general specialty cultivation. Driscoll's uses my products because it makes their berries sweeter. It keeps the purple more purple, because the microbes in the soil are responsible for the metabolistic and expressions, some of the things like terpenes and stuff like that. It really is dependent on what's happening with the microbial bacteria in the environment in the soil. So I want you guys to picture this. We optimize this. So I want you to see something and optimize with me. Underneath the ground, I want you to picture the coral reef and see it how you see it right now. The coral reef with a structure and a bunch of fish and life in that area. That's called the rhizosphere. And that's where the electronic activity and the metabolistic kicks start with your plant. This is where stuff gets really important right here. This is where I like to work. This is where you can optimize genetic expression. If you're in a homozygous state and you top out at 22, 23% or THC, you can optimize expression to have bacteria work better for the plant to uptake. So it's really important. I've worked with some of the biggest companies in the cannabis space over my 20 years now. I really love optimizing, and it's really, really crazy important when you go to the next level of understanding how cannabis and COGS and your return on investment go in. So if you can optimize all of these different things, and if you can start working on your environment that is non-practical, right? Most people go, I'll buy sunshine number 4, I'll feed the plant NPK. We're kind of doing it backwards. It's old school. We have to think better in agriculture. We have to think better for cannabis, because we're largely inhaling it or we're selling it. And no matter what we're doing, we're creating dollars and cents. THC, that molecule, is money. CBD, that molecule, is money. Beta-caryophyllene is money in cannabis. So if you can optimize those expressions through doing everything these folks said, then if you can look into the genetic sequence, you can look at the cannabis and see where you can optimize. Take the rhizosphere, make it the best you can. You'll produce the best cannabis, and it'll probably produce the best money if you're a businessman or you're a cultivator. So that's what I do. I love doing it. I've been doing it a long time. I have a couple of different cannabis companies that I've done that with, and so yeah, that's it.
Fantastic. Well, obviously, we have an incredible panel here today, and I'm sure that they're going to be willing to stick around and answer some questions for you. But again, thank you guys for being here today, for sharing your expertise with everyone. Obviously, it's this information sharing and having these networking events just so people can share this information, network with each other, talk about these things that are so vitally important in our industry, and watch it move forward. So thank you very much, guys. Let's give everyone a round of applause. Any questions from the audience?
Sandy it up. Make it Sandy.
Yeah, so I had a question for Tim here. What are some of the most prevalent microbes that you work with, or that you found are compatible with cannabis?
Yeah, so microbial definition and getting them to be stable in the soil is really difficult. You have to find the right consortia, and a consortia, it means what microbials work best together. So we've identified 3 very specific bacillus that are the number one attractants that are the first ones that are in the cannabis microbiome, and they track Aspergillus, they attract everything else. But this specific consortia of bacillus is what really kicks in, really starts the metabolistic phase of the cannabis plant, and it's really active in the rhizosphere specifically.
So are those usually like derived from the lab extractions from rice water? Are those kind of the same bacteria or same microbes when we're cultivating those lab solutions or mixtures?
So the bacillus that I use are sporadic. So they're fermented, they're live fermented. They stay alive, but they stay in their sporadic form until they have something to work with, until they have a plant to eat with and survive. So mine are a little bit different. The traditional like bacteria that are formed with like rice water actions and stuff like that are non-sporic. So mine will stay in their spore form. They'll stay alive in incredibly hot conditions, which is important in scaled agriculture. So that's one of the things I considered. So if you're going to noodle line 60 acres and you're going to run on top, and that tape's going to get hot as shit, are your nutrients going to survive? I heard they're even going to be good by the time they get to the end. Well, I had to make sure of that, so I used this specific consortia that stays in their spore form until they get to the house they need to be in, and then they come and do the work.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think we had one more question there in the back. No?
Just kidding.
Okay. I think we're good. Yeah, I think we're good. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.